There were a ton of amazing Dragon Ball Z games for the DS, but by far one of the best has to be Attack of the Saiyans. It's essentially a turn-based RPG that follows the events of the anime and sees you taking control as some of the most popular characters from the show. Like many of its kind, it's mostly divided into two separate styles of play, with exploring and battles being equally as prominent as you make your way through the adventure. The combat is by far the most engaging aspect of the game though, and sees you commanding a whole host of abilities and skills that fans of the series will know and love. You've got your basic attacks as well as ki blasts, but where this system truly comes into its own is through something known as the rage gauge. As you attack and deal out damage as well as receive it, the bar slowly fills, and once it's full, you get to enter sparking mode, where you can use ultra ki attacks or combine one with another character to make a combination attack. These skills literally light up the screen in style, and see each of them coming along with some great animations as they play out. From powerful Kamehamehas to combos that completely wreck the opposition, there's a huge amount of them to unlock. And here is where Attack of the Saiyans shines, as you'll never find yourself having to needlessly grind to hit certain levels, as the experience points you receive are pretty balanced, and it allows you to make your way through the game at a nice pace. Overall, Attack of the Saiyans is by far one of the best games to ever come out of the franchise, and thanks to the engaging gameplay, you don't need to be a fan of the source material in order to enjoy it. So if you can find it for a good price, this is one game you do not want to skip. Custom Robo is a mech-based fighting game that places a huge emphasis on customization and combat, with the main draw being the insane amount of variety that the game offers. You take control of a young boy who aspires to win a tournament known as the Robo Cup, and while the story isn't anything to write home about, it does do a good job of providing context to all of your actions within the game, and setting up what really helps Custom Robo excel, and that's the gameplay. This game is about one thing: two heavily armed robots beating the absolute crap out of each other, and after being flung into a holographic arena, you and your enemy will unleash a flurry of bullets, homing missiles and explosives to chip away at each other's health points. After a few battles, you'll be ducking behind walls, air dashing with ease, and sniping your enemies from afar. And then the game really comes into its own, when you get the chance to start customizing your mech. Now the sheer amount of options on offer is just staggering, from different weapons, body parts and armor that all have their own unique attributes and effect on the battlefield. Tinkering away and experimenting with all of these different parts is half of the fun, but what takes it a step further is the range of different enemies you come across that require you to swap out parts and change things up to deal with the unique threat that they pose. Some of them like to attack from afar, whilst others take a more up-close and personal approach, so swapping out your components depending on the situation at hand is half of the battle, and if you make a mistake, the fight will be a lot harder than you expected. All in all, with its wealth of content, visceral gameplay, and near endless amount of customization, Custom Robo Arena is definitely a game that deserves a spot in your collection as well. Kirby Superstar was always one of my favorite Super Nintendo games, so when the news hit that a complete remake would be making its way to the DS, along with new modes of play and updated visuals, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. Thankfully, it didn't disappoint, and soon became one of my go-tos on the handheld that's just as enjoyable today as it was all those years ago. What makes it different from other Kirby games though is that instead of just being one big adventure, this one is basically a collection of several shorter experiences with their own storylines and mechanics. From racing to classic platforming and battles, there's a lot to get stuck into, and as you tackle this huge selection of levels, they all rely on the player taking advantage of several different power-ups that Kirby can use, much like the games before it, with up to 19 of them being available. Depending on what hopeless enemy you consume, you can have Kirby wield a sword, lash out with kung fu moves, sling magical spells, bombs, feathers, and several other ridiculous overpowered weapons. On top of this, by sacrificing your current power-up, you can create one of the enemy characters with that ability to fight alongside you. They have all of the moves and capabilities of a Kirby of that ability, and if he dies, it does not take away from your lives, so it's essentially a free way to double your power. The best part of this helper feature though is that one of your friends can play as him instead using a second DS, and this is easily one of the best ways to enjoy the game. With the variety of gameplay on offer and the unique powers that you get to use, it's definitely something that's hard to put down once you've gotten into it. It'll likely keep you busy for some time to come. Metal Max is an RPG with a twist, and instead of the usual medieval or fantasy setting, you're thrown into a post-apocalyptic world that shares more in common with the likes of Fallout and Mad Max, as you assume the role of a bounty hunter who has no memory of his past and decides to travel the world in the hopes of retrieving his memories and finding out his true identity. This is where Metal Max excels and presents a truly open-ended journey that the player can take at their own pace. To survive in this harsh world though, you'll need money, friends and a ride, which are all soon taken care of in the opening hours, with a team of like-minded heroes joining your cause that are all made up of different classes and offer many different uses in battle, may that be on foot or in one of the many different tanks that you can create and customize throughout the course of the game. What makes this aspect so engaging is that there are so many different parts to acquire and utilize, from different guns to armor sets and treads, each of which have a noticeable difference when out on the field or during battle, that playing around with each of your character's setup is essentially one of the most rewarding parts of the experience. The battles themselves are presented in a turn-based manner and see you tackling a huge range of enemies that possess their own unique threats. Thankfully, you've got a huge variety of skills and abilities to help you stand your ground, and working towards unlocking them all is no easy feat, as Metal Max is a game that's not afraid to hit you whilst you're down. To be fair, the difficulty might be too much for some, but if you stick with it, it easily becomes one of the best RPGs that you can find on the DS. With it now having a full English translation, it's easier than ever to jump in and try it out for yourself. Monster Racers is a game that seamlessly blends several different genres together, such as platforming, racing and monster collecting, to create something really special that unfortunately not many players jumped into. It's set in a world that's home to countless exotic creatures that live side by side with the human population, who use these monsters in an annual racing tournament that many of the youth aspire to become the best at. After choosing your character and obtaining your first monster, you set out on this journey to become the world's best racer, which sees you visiting several different continents and collecting as many monsters as you can along the way. Now, the gameplay takes the form of a typical top-down RPG, with the player exploring one of the many different locations and interacting with NPCs to obtain quests. These tasks motivate you to make new monster friends, compete in races against other rivals and wild monsters, and just for kicks, face off against a sinister group of villains, all in the process of becoming the monster racing champion. Now, there are two main methods to win a race against a wild creature. Either you cross the finish line first, or you make an early impression on the monster by outpacing it in pure speed. The controls are the same as in a standard 2D platformer, and see you simply pushing the D-pad forward to gain momentum and using the B button to jump. Your monster's turbo meter will fill up as you run, and when it does, you'll be propelled forward and take out any of the monsters that stand in your way. As simple as the concept sounds, the races are a hell of a lot of fun. Even though it would be easy to label this as a simple Pokemon ripoff, it's got enough of its own ideas that make it worth trying out. Contra is one of those series that has got a reputation for being quite difficult, and WayForward took this to the absolute extreme with the fourth entry on the DS. After the defeat of Red Falcon in the previous game, a new entity known as Black Viper has appeared, and sees you once again having to take up the fight and completely wipe them from the face of the earth. You get to choose from one of 4 different characters, but there's no significant differences in terms of their maneuverability. They can all leap and jump over enemies, cling on to certain walls, perform aerial somersaults and crawl along the ground. You could even hang on high ledges or ceilings with a grappling hook, but if you don't feel like playing defensively, then there is a wealth of different weapons that come into play. Even though you only start out with a pretty pathetic one-shot rifle, you'll soon come into contact with a range of different power-ups that see you spraying the screen with a wave of buckshot, roasting your foes with a flamethrower, or annihilating everything in your path with a laser rifle, machine gun or rockets. And the fact that you can switch between 2 weapons on the fly is a lucky break that allows you to adapt to the on-screen mayhem quite quickly when the action heats up. Now, there's about 9 levels for you to make your way through, each of which has a boss waiting for you at the end, which will truly test your patience and skill. These enemies are larger than life and usually take up both of the screens, and seeing you having to take into account their huge size, which means you'll be darting from the top to the bottom of the playing field, all the while dodging their attacks. It can be a bit overwhelming, but therein lies the fun that Contra is all about, the non-stop action which the 4th entry has got by the bucket load. If you're up to the challenge, then Contra 4 would make a worthy addition to your collection. From the Abyss is an action RPG that throws you into the role of an adventurer as you set out to seal the gates between dimensions, wherein evil forces manage to break through once again. When it comes to gameplay, it shares a lot with the likes of the Mana series and operates on a basic hack and slash setup that sees you leveling up your character and acquiring different types of weapons and armor as you progress. Operating out of your hometown, which serves as the main hub area, you venture into the Abyss and combat the ever-growing number of enemies in the hopes of sparing your town and the people within it. Combat is extremely simple, with your basic attacks being assigned to the A button and all of your specials being mapped to the others. There's a generous amount of different weapons to wield, from swords to axes, spears and rods that all have a specific advantage that plays a big part in how effective your attacks are. Likewise, other things like armor, potions and specialized accessories offer a beneficial boost, and the option to consume the souls of defeated opponents to generate new powers offers a great twist on the gameplay. Since every opponent type has a unique power, gathering a ton of new skills from them turns into an addictive side activity rather quickly, and provides you with a nigh-on endless stream of new abilities to learn. If there was one negative I could throw at the game though, it would be for an RPG, it's extremely short and can easily be beat in about 5 hours. There's no cutscenes to watch, no world map to explore, with the entire adventure just being comprised of 8 dungeons to complete. In that aspect, it is a bit disappointing, but the minute-to-minute play more than makes up for it, and with the wealth of replay value on offer, there's always a reason for another run. Henry Hatsworth is by far one of the most unique platformers you can find on the DS that takes full advantage of the handheld by spreading the gameplay across both screens and integrating them perfectly to create something entirely different from the norm. While the top screen shows all of the platforming action, the touchscreen is relegated to puzzles, and there's an ever-rising stack of blocks on the bottom screen of varying colours. As you defeat enemies on the top, they appear below as blocks, and by lining up 3 or more of the same type, you can knock them out of the grid, but should they reach the top, they will once again appear on the top screen to cause Henry trouble. When it comes to the platforming itself, it's a pretty standard setup, and at the start of the game you've got a limited number of actions and skills in your repertoire, including a few sword swipes that you can perform in different directions depending on the situation, but as you progress you'll eventually get access to several weapons like a gun, bombs and a boomerang that help you hold your own against the many different types of enemies and bosses that you'll run into. Further complicating the gameplay is that your ammo for these weapons is also tied to the puzzles on the bottom screen, with a gauge on the right side that represents your ammo fluctuating depending on how successful you are at clearing the blocks that appear. Even though Henry Hatsworth had a lot going for it, it's one game that flew well under the radar for many DS owners and never garnered the same recognition as some of the more popular platformers on the system. Thankfully, it still goes for a pretty decent price if you're looking to add it to your collection, so if you're on the lookout for a new platformer to try on the DS, Henry Hatsworth would make a great choice. Tao's Adventure is a very simplistic dungeon crawler that shares a lot in common with Azure Dreams on the PlayStation, and all revolves around a mysterious tower that looms over the player's hometown that is chock full of monsters, but it turns out their eggs are worth big money, which sees various hunters coming from all corners of the earth to try and brave the tower and take the prize for themselves. As you would expect, it's not long until everything goes wrong with a huge storm that strikes the tower and seemingly opens the gates for these monsters to roam the world and create chaos. This is where Tao comes in, and his ability to wield air spells, which involves drawing symbols in the air to conjure up all different types of magic, from elemental blasts to protective shields that take full advantage of the dual screen setup of the DS, with the player having to actually draw them out themselves in order to pull them off. In fact, the entire game relies on the touchscreen, from moving to selecting items and carrying out attacks, which opens it up to players of all skill levels and ages. But it would have been nice to have seen an option to use the buttons instead, as at times it can be a little unresponsive, but not to the point where it completely ruins the experience. Whilst in the tower, the game draws on both turn-based and real-time elements, and for each move you make, your enemy will do so as well. When there's no enemies about, you're free to roam like any other action RPG, but upon seeing one, you will then have to plan your approach wisely, and that's not even mentioning your monster companions, which also give you the upper hand in battle as they fight alongside you. Admittedly, Tao's Adventure won't be for everyone, but with several dungeons to explore, plenty of items to find and spells to master, for those that it clicks with, there's plenty to love. Nora in the Time Studio is an RPG that sees you filling the role of Nora, a young girl who is training in the art of time travel but has been mistaken for a witch that tormented the town for years. Because of this, she hopes to gain the trust of the locals by undertaking several quests that see her traversing all over the kingdom and being joined by several people who want to help her to clear her name. It's largely split up into three main styles of play, may that be foraging for items, exploring the world, or taking on enemies in battles, but what lies at the center of the experience is crafting, as Nora can use her time-bending powers to manipulate one of the many different items that you come across and produce completely new ones in the process. This all boils down to essentially hitting fast forward or rewind on an item, where you can turn a fruit back into a flower or a flower back into a seed, with many different recipes producing a wealth of different results that all come into play throughout the game, mainly during battle, where the fruits of your labor come to the forefront and allow you to be far stronger and able to fight back against one of the various enemies that lurk around each and every corner. When entering battle, players can arrange Nora and her party on a 3x3 grid. A character's attack, defense, and range will all change if their party arrangement is switched around on the grid, so it's a good idea to position your mages in the back row and your fighters who deal a lot of damage and are strong in defense at the front. Although the game isn't that long and can be finished in about 10 hours, there's thankfully plenty of reasons to jump back in, with up to 8 different endings being available and plenty of things to see that's not possible with just one playthrough. Well, that does it for another video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with and to take part in giveaways. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.